Hi guys, and welcome back to another IBRACORP video. Thanks for coming back and checking out the channel. Really appreciate everyone that likes and subscribes. Just a big thank you. You know, we've just hit over 300 subscribers, and that's really cool. I'm really happy to be helping people out, and it seems like it's making a difference, so it's encouraging to want to keep going. So today I'm going to be looking at Authelia again. Now, a lot of comments from the last video was that it might have been a little bit too advanced. And look, I couldn't agree more. It was advanced, and it was really made for someone that sort of already knew their way around unraid. And thinking about it again, I'd like to make this new one, which is going to be a lot more in-depth, right from the start to the end, and we're going to do it together. And hopefully by the end of it, you've got a nice working Authelia setup. So we're going to be following my guide. Now, you may have seen in my last video, in the beginner guide, that I have written an actual guide here. We're basically going to be following that, but I'm going to show you a couple of shortcuts that'll make it a bit quicker as well. And I'm going to be following my guide, but I'm going to have the guide over to the side. So hang in there, let's buckle in, and let's get stuck into it. So guys, you've decided Authelia is looking really interesting for you. I've already sort of gone through this in my beginners video. If you haven't seen that, go check that out as well. Otherwise, let's just get into the cases. So Authelia offers a single sign-on, secure authentication, and is Kubernetes ready. So it's really scalable, which is good. Here's some other features that you may not know. So obviously allows username and password, and that can be either in a particular type of file, or known as user's database, or connected to LDAP. It supports both. I've used both, and I'm currently using LDAP. If you don't want to go that far yet, try it with a user database first, and we'll go through that step process today. Has a nice UI, one-time password support, two-factor security support as well, which is great. It allows passwords to be reset, which is really good. It actually works with LDAP quite well as well, without having to set up like some sort of portal. It can regulate the login attempts and provide a little bit of brute force security, and is highly scalable. And the high availability of it means that you can basically run it on a very large scale, across multiple servers even. The high availability is great, and just means that it's really scalable later, or now, depending on your needs, whether it's for home, business, etc. If you're looking this up, you sort of have an idea what it's all about. My beginners video sort of covered this anyway. We're going to start right from the beginning. So we're on our brand new server here, guys. This is a brand new server. Some of the feedback I had was, you know, it's hard to follow when you have an established server, and I agree with that. So I've got a nice fresh one here. I've only used it for a couple of videos, but if you're a brand new unraid user, you could pretty much just follow this right from where we are now. So the first step we're going to go into is head to our App Store. In the App Store, we're going to look up Redis. There's a couple of different containers for Redis. I like to use this one, which in my guide is referred to as Bitnami's repository, but I think he might have just changed his name. It's the same creator. And the reason why is, if I click install, you can see that he's mapped a password field. So some of them don't have that field mapped already. You can map it yourself, but it's just easier when it's there, of course. Now I'm going to go through the top to bottom here of a Docker template just to show you. So we've gone to the App Store and we found the app that we want to install, and it brings you to the template here. So under network type, I highly recommend you use a custom network type for all your Dockers so they can communicate with each other, and you can have separate networks and have them communicate differently. If you don't know how to create your custom network, it's really easy. Watch this. Open the terminal in the top right. Type docker network create, followed by the name of the network. And if I just type that, for example, and I hit enter, it will go ahead and create this network. So I already created this one before. So once you've created it, you might want to refresh or go back through the App Store to bring you back to this point so that it comes up in the list. So in my case, I'm using the IBRACORP. So make sure that as we're going through this, guys, we're going to make sure we pick this network type so that they're all on the same network. So under here, allow empty password, and we're going to say no. We don't want an empty password. We want this to be secure. Remember, we're doing something involving security. So we want to make sure that we are being as secure as possible as we go along. Now, for the sake of this video, I'm just going to keep the password simple because it's just going to be easier for me to remember as we go through. But in your case, please, 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 please make sure that you are putting secure passwords in here for everything that we do. But today I'm just going to go with password. So please don't do that, okay? So let's continue. We'll just install that and wait for that to finish. So that's finished. We'll click done. And if we just head back to the Docker tab, we can see that Redis is running. Click on log. And if we just have a quick look, it's ready to accept connections. So that seems all right. That seems to be running. Nothing to worry about there. Now we can continue with my guide. So I'm reading the guide on the side here, guys. So if you want to follow along with that, it might help as well. I'll put the link down in the description again. So I've installed Redis. The next step is MariaDB, which is a database server. So we've hit install, and on the network type, again, we're going to pick IBRACORP. The port is fine. We're going to leave that at 3306, and I recommend if it's free on your system that you just leave it at 3306 because a lot of things have it as a default sort of port. But if maybe you want to change it for security, anything like that, then change it here. Under the root password, again, I'm going to be just putting password in. All right, so we're happy with that. We're just going to click OK. We're happy with where it's being stored in the app data folder, so we'll apply that. And wait for that one to install. And that's finished. And if we go back to Docker again, we can see our database. So that's running perfectly fine. We're pretty happy with that. Now, if you're reading my guide, you'll notice that it talks about creating the database and the user for the database using the command line, which is really easy. And I've already written out what you need to put in there. But I'm going to show you another way to do it. In light of making a video about this, I thought a visual approach might be better. So if we head back to the App Store and we look up a particular program, you'll see AdMiner here. Now, AdMiner just gives you a nice interface so that you can manage your databases from a GUI, from a graphical user interface, which is quite nice. So if you just click the little install button, again, we want to make sure IBRACORP is the network. 8080, I'm not sure I like that, to be honest with you, so I'm going to change that to 8585. We don't want to change the theme or add any plugins. And we'll click apply and wait for that to install. As you can tell, guys, a lot of this is really just clicking and waiting. The real nitty-gritty is with the config of Authelia, but we'll get through that too. And that's done. We'll just head back to Docker. Under Docker, you will see AdMiner. So left click and Web UI. And it'll bring you to this interface. As you can see from this drop-down, you can pick from quite a few different databases, which is really cool. In our case, we're using MySQL, so we'll leave it with that. For the server, you want to put the host name and the port number. And if you come back to Docker in your unraid, here's our database, MariaDB, and here's our IP and our port number. So you might want to just copy that. It just makes it a little bit easier for you. So put that in there. The next field is the username. Now, the default username, because we haven't created a user yet, is root. So I've created root. The password is the password that we set for root in the container. So I've gone back to Docker under MariaDB, and it's the password that you've put here. Okay, in my case, it's password. In your case, it's going to be that super long, complicated password that you made. If you had a specific database that already was made and you want to access it directly, you could put that in the last field, but we haven't got one, so we're just going to click login. So I've clicked login, and we're now in the database server, and we're looking at it from a nice graphical point of view. So if you were to click on these, for example, which are just default in MySQL, You can see the different tables, the lengths, and any sort of comments against them about what they might be. So it's really helpful when you're trying to find something that uses a database to navigate to it. Now there's other ways to do it, guys. I'm not saying this is the only way. You can install MySQL on your main computer and just access it remotely or anything like that. If you're a bit more advanced, that's fine. This is a bit more for the beginners, just to give you a nice visual look at it. So ignore all that and we'll go back to the main screen. And now, once you've got to this point, you can just follow the guide that I've written, but in a visual manner. And I'll show you that now. So first we'll create a database. We'll call the database Authelia and click save. So we've created a database and it's empty. The next thing we want to do is create a user. Click on privileges, create user, leave the server as a percentage, and under username, type in Authelia. We then just create a password for this user. So this will be for the user to access this database, if that makes sense. So we don't want all the passwords to be the same, because in theory you would want to separate everything and make sure that one person's account can't be used to access another system. So we've put a password in there. Under the privileges table, just select all privileges and click save. So as you can see, we now have a user, and that user accesses our database. And if we just click back, you will see our new database there ready to go. We've set up our database and we can move on to the next step. So now the next step is Authelia. Now, I don't know if you know this about Unraid, but you can click and drag these Docker containers, and that changes the order of their startup. And it starts from top to bottom. So when you restart your server, the first one will be the first one to start. So I usually like to keep an order of things if you just visualize your network. So for example, I want my NGINX Proxy manager to run first, because that will make sure all of my links are running and my connection's out. Then I usually have database applications, as you can see here, and then I have everything else underneath that. Because if you've got to think about it in the order of dependency, okay? An application that has a database, you would need the database up first before the application tries to start. Otherwise, it's going to fail on you. So it's important that you put them in an order that makes sense. There's also another feature. If you click on the basic view to advanced view here, as you can see, when you check auto start, which means if they were all off or Docker was disabled or your server restarted, then these Dockers would automatically start up. And once you check it on, it actually gives you an option to put seconds here for it to wait before executing the next Docker startup. So I can say here, for example, wait 5 seconds. When this container starts, it will wait 5 seconds before it tries to start the next one, and so on and so forth. So you might have some containers that take quite a while to start up. In that case, you might want to put in a longer startup gap or a wait time so that the containers underneath that might depend on it have time for it to start properly. Alright guys, so let's get into it again. So back to the App Store, and we're going to look up Authelia. And as you can see, here's my repository template that I've put up for everyone. We'll click install. And there's really not much here. I've put a link to the instructions that I'm reading as well in here as well. Under network type, we'll set that to IBRACORP. I'm happy with the default port, and I'm happy with the app data location. And we'll just wait for that to pull down. And that's finished. Now we head back to Docker. You'll notice that Authelia is stopped. Click on log, and you'll see that we have automatically generated a config file. Okay, one didn't exist and now it does. So in our file explorer, we can see the file that it's created here, and it's a configuration.yml. And it's the default that Authelia creates once you first start it up. As you can see, there's a whole bunch of settings in there, but if you were to use my guide, I've actually uploaded the files onto the GitHub, which again, the description is down below. And I've had mine reconfigured a little bit just so that we can have it easier to follow, and it has the file backend config set up for us as well. So we'll start going through this file and we'll make sure that it matches your setup. So starting from the top, we don't have to change anything here. You can just leave all that the same. Once you get to JWT secret, you don't have to remember this, guys. This is just for the token and it will be used to keep it secure. So just put any random code in there. But I like to use the encryption generator, it just makes it a bit easier. The default redirection URL. So what this is basically just a default redirection when Authelia doesn't have a specific place that you are trying to get to. So if you were trying to get to sonar.u.com and it redirects to Authelia, they authenticate, it will then send them back to sonar.u.com. However, if you go directly to the website that Authelia is living on and you log in and sign in successfully, it doesn't necessarily have anywhere that you're trying to get to. So it'll just redirect you to whatever this is, okay, which can be your main URL, for example. So in my case, I'm just going to put our main website and we'll scroll down. For this here, you can just give it any name. Usually your domain name is the best. This shows how long the one-time password will be current for. So we're going to say 30 seconds. We don't need to change anything here. Scroll down. The Duo API. Now, if you want to use Duo, I personally have not used it, so I cannot really give you instructions on how to set it up. So in my case, we're actually going to comment this out. And here you can disable whether the reset password function is allowed. So I like to keep it there. If you don't, just change it to true. How often you want it to pull from your authentication backend. We're going to skip this for this video because remember we're talking about a beginner watching this. So we don't want to overcomplicate things. So we'll just skip that for now. Come down. And here you'll see the file. So instead of using LDAP like Windows Active Directory or freeipa or Open LDAP as a database for users, for example, you can just have a file, a user's database file. So basically you've got the path to the file and its name. And as you can see, we're using this algorithm. Now, in the guide, I've written the website, but I'll bring it over. And this just lets us create a nice, strong hash to protect our passwords, etc. And if I just bring up the guide here to compare, so you can see the plain text input is our desired password. So in our case, we'll just put this. And so as you can see, it's converted our plain text password into a hex password. And as you can see, we had to pull a file from our GitHub called users_database. So this will be the name of our users, and you have to be real careful of your spacing here, guys. So just make sure you follow this. So this will be the username. In our case, it's John, okay? Your username might be whatever format that you want it to be. The display name is the full name. So that's John Doe, for example. For the password, we'll be taking the output encoded form. Take that and basically just paste it in there. As you can see, we've got our email address there and the groups. It's really important that you set these correctly because with the password reset, this is where it's read from. So we've just put our email address and we said that we're part of the admins and the dev group. So now that we've configured that user's database file, we'll just copy it and paste it into the app data folder, Authelia folder, just so that it lives beside your configuration.yml. Once you've done that, we can now come back to our configuration.yml file, and we know that we've done this part, so we can move on. If you scroll down a little further, you can see our default policy. So the access control, a lot of people get held up on the access control, and pretty much the way you need to think about this is, what's the default policy for any average Joe that wants to come to my website? You might be thinking to yourself, well, I want them to just be denied. If I don't know who they are and they're protected by Authelia, deny them. Just deny it. The rules then explicitly state who's allowed to access said protected URLs. So it's more secure to keep it as deny. A lot of people think that changing it, they think that it's working, but really you're just bypassing it by default. So any website that you don't want Authelia to protect, just don't put Authelia over the top of it. Okay, but the ones you do, it means you want it to be secure. So set it to deny by default. Then under the rules, you can start configuring all the rules that you like. So we've got the domain, the subject, it's either the people or conditions which are allowed to access it. And then you have the policy. So you can have either bypass, one factor, two factor, or deny. And that will basically judge what you want for that particular domain. So as you can see, this is a wildcard domain. So your whole domain would be protected by this. But we don't want that. We just want one particular domain. And for our sake, we're just going to go with Overseer. It's our favorite little test container at the moment. So we'll just call that overseer.ibracorp.org, and I'm making sure that matches my DNS entry in Cloudflare. We haven't got to that yet, guys, but I do have a video already out about that. So then you've got your session name, so you can just leave it as a default if you like, or you can change it. The secret. So with the secret, again, we're going to use that encryption generator. So we'll generate a new 128-bit one, go back to our config, and put that in as the secret. The time in seconds before the cookie expires and the session is reset. Set that to whatever you think is relevant. Sometimes 8 hours might be good, so we'll just put it on 8 hours. The inactivity time, we're going to leave it at 5 minutes. This is 1 month, so how long you want it to remember the person for, 1 month is set. You can change that to whatever you like. I'm going to leave it as 1 month. The domain to protect. So you need to make sure this matches the domain that you are trying to actually protect, guys. So make sure that's there. Now we want to put in the information from Redis. And we're back in Unraid here. We can see our Redis details. So that's our IP address. Got my placeholder there. We're just going to replace that. And 6379 for the port. As you can see, 6379, that matches what we've got. So we can go on. If you click on Redis and compare to the next part, this will be the password that we set here. In my case, it was password. Put whatever you had in there. The database index. Now this part is important, guys. If you are just installing Redis, you haven't used it for anything else, you can just leave it at 0. Okay. If you have used Redis for quite a while, you might want to use a different index number, so then it uses a different database inside of Redis. So the number basically tells it what database it is you want to write to or read from. Because this is the first one that's going to be in here, we'll let 0 be that one. We scroll down a little bit further, and we're now looking at the regulation. So we can allow the person to retry 3 times before they're banned. This allows a certain amount of time for them to attempt login before being banned, and the length of time before a banned user can log in again. So basically, like, you know, kicking them out for a certain amount of time. So under storage here, guys, you've got several different options. As I said before, you can use the light version of Authelia, and that just basically means uncommenting these entries here, and it will use an SQLite database. I personally do not recommend doing this, so I always recommend setting up MariaDB like we did, and it didn't really take that long, so why not just do it like that? So we want to put our MariaDB details, and as you can see, it's these ones just there. The port is 3306. Our database, we called it Authelia, and our username, we also called it Authelia. Our password is the password that we set, and we can move on to the next part. With the SMTP, I highly recommend you set this up. So I've just put out a video recently about using your Gmail account with your domain so that you have a domain address. I recommend you watch that because it'll give you all the information that you need to put into here. If you're using my video to create your domain email address, it would look something like this. So your username would be whatever it is, Gmail, your Gmail password, This is the host. The port would be different if you're using my method. It's 587 for TLS. And sender, so whatever your email address is that you set up. Subject is Authelia followed by the title. And it's got a couple of test things in there by default. You can change that. Disabling require TLS we won't do because we need it for this type of connection, which you can actually see it down here anyway. Sending an email using a Gmail, and this is pretty much it. So guys, that's configuring Authelia, okay? That part takes honestly the longest, I reckon, out of the whole process. And with little to no information when I first started this, it took me a while to get it all wrapped up to make it such an easy thing to follow. So we've configured our YML. We'll just copy all of this because I've just saved this on my desktop, but we want this in our unraid app data folder. So here we are on app data and Authelia config.yml. I really should have just made all the changes in here, but that's all right. Click save, and we've got all the information that we want for Authelia to start up. So minimize all this and head back to unraid. So we're back in unraid now. We've configured our config file. Check this to auto start. And now we're gonna get ready to start it up for the first time and see if it works. So as you can see, we've started. We'll check the logs. And that's okay. That's because we've got the notifier startup in the config file. So you guys saw that error message, and we're just looking back at our config file and can see that it's the notifier startup check. So I'm just actually going to disable that because we don't really want it, and we'll click save. And we'll try and start it again. We'll click restart. Now looking at the logs, that looks a lot better. So if we try to open up with Web UI, we're provided with the Authelia interface. So a lot of people test it at this stage and they start wondering why it's not working like it should. This isn't really the best way to test it. There's one last step that we have to do, guys, and that is to protect something with Authelia. So I hope you've already watched my NGINX Proxy Manager videos. If you haven't, please go watch them because you're going to need to know for this part how that all works. But I'm going to walk through it with you right now. So I'm in NGINX Proxy Manager. I have only one proxy host, which is Proxy itself. And we want to now set up one for Authelia and one for Overseer. So I'm going to quickly make an Overseer one. So I've created that. Took no time at all, and I can confirm that that's working. So the next step, if I bring over the guide, and it tells you what needs to be changed, but to find those files, they're just up here. So make sure you click on it, and then you've got what you need. So what we're looking at right now is the protected endpoint, okay? So Authelia portal conf is for Authelia, which we haven't created yet in NGINX Proxy Manager. So we're just putting in this first, which will be for whatever we want to protect. So if I just go in there and I copy all of this, and we come back to NGINX Proxy Manager, click the three dots there on Overseer and click Edit. Under Advanced, paste what we just created. Now scroll to the top, and you can see a couple of details that we need to change. So first of all is our server IP, which is, there is a placeholder there as well. So we make sure we change that. Scroll down a little bit more, a little more. And you'll get to this next location block, the container name. So the container name is the name of this container that we are protecting. I can go back to the unraid server and know the container name is this. So you can just copy that and place that here instead of container name. Let's go down a little further and you will find your domain. Now here's something that we didn't cover yet. You need to have a DNS entry for your Authelia page. And that could be anything. Usually people like to call it auth.yourdomain in this case. You can change it to whatever. So we'll come back to Cloudflare here real quick. And we'll create a CNAME. We'll call it auth@ibracorp.org and click save. So if I come back to here, I know that I need to change this to IBRACORP. And that's it. There's nothing else that needs to be in here, so we'll click save. Now if you tried to go to that link, it's not going to take you anywhere because we haven't set up our host for Authelia yet. And back in GitHub, let's go back. You'll find Authelia portal here. Click on that. Copy all of this information and head back to NGINX Proxy Manager. In here, we're going to create a new proxy host. Again, we've already created our DNS entry for it. So we simply type it in. And we confirm our IP and port number is 101 for the IP, 9091 for the port. We'll apply all this sort of protection, head to SSL, we select our SSL certificate. If you don't know how to do this, please watch my Cloudflare video, I've just put that out recently too. Under advanced is where we're going to paste that content that we just copied from our GitHub page. And again, we're going to change the placeholders. So in my guide, it explains what parts we're changing, but on the video, it's just easier if I just show you like this, of course. Let's go down a little further, and I believe that's it for this particular file. And we'll click save. Now, if I was to click that link, sorry guys, I made a mistake. I put my usual domain in there, just out of habit. So now if I click that link, you can see we reach auth.ibracorp.org and it gives us our Authelia page. Awesome. If I tried to log into that, it's just going to try and bounce us to our redirect domain. So instead, let's test going to Overseer. So if you look up in the address bar, you can see that it's got the redirect link in there and it's asking us to log in. So our username was John. And there you go, guys. So we tried to get to Overseer. It bounced us to Authelia. Authelia said you need to log in. We signed in and there you go. Now it's sent us over to our main page after we logged in. All for us. So we didn't have to do anything there. The biggest thing I can recommend to people when doing this sort of work is to open a incognito tab, and which is Control-Shift-N, and that just makes sure that no cookies are being saved and causing issues with you trying to access stuff. A lot of people will get hooked there, so I thought it's a really important little tip. Just go into incognito mode. So if we come back to our config file, we'll try something a little bit different. So instead of one-factor authentication, we'll actually put in two-factor. And we'll hit save. Head back to unraid, we'll restart Authelia for those changes to take effect. Back in our incognito tab, so we'll try to get to our Overseer link. So it asks us to log in again. And now it gives you the option for a one-time password. So it says we need a one-time password. And it asks you whether you're registered before. If you haven't registered, click on not registered yet. And it says an email has been sent. So if we come back to our email, there you go. There's our email address. So we'll click register. And from this point, you can pretty much just scan the QR code with your phone and use the authenticator. And it will ask you for that PIN every time you go to use it, which is pretty cool. So there you go, guys. There's Authelia, start to finish. I know it was a long one. I'm hoping that I covered everything. You know, with my 2 videos and the written guide, I'm hoping that is just enough information to get people going. If you have trouble, you know, feel free to open an issue on my Git. If I can't solve it, and I obviously recommend logging it with the actual Authelia Git. Although with the unique setup of having it with NGINX Proxy Manager and on Unraid, that's where I found a lot of difficulty getting some help. So feel free to reach out anytime. Leave your comments down below, and please think about subscribing. It really helps. If we can get to 1,000, that would be awesome, guys. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing you in the next IBRACORP video.